Hey guys, this is Brother Justin from Charity Baptist Church. Joining me is my pastor, Pastor Leo Mejia. Nice to meet you here.
Hello.
So today I want to talk about a very important subject about silent partners. Why do we need silent partners while out soul winning? So let's roll the intro. So Pastor, can you tell us what is a silent partner?
Sure. So silent partners, very important. We have, whenever we go out and sharing the gospel, we always take somebody with us. And so practically speaking, what we'll do is when we go out door to door, knocking out doors in the community, we'll bring one person with us. So we're not going individually. So the silent partner would be the one who is with them. That's the partner who is not necessarily speaking. So you have one guy knocking on the door and talking, and you don't have the second person speaking. That person will actually be silent, hence we call them the silent partner.
And also you mentioned going 2 by 2, and it's biblical. Jesus sent the apostles 2 by 2, and it's safe. And then some ladies, they might not feel comfortable going 2 by 2. We may go by threes, have 3 ladies at the same time. But in the end, safety is of the Lord. If we are filled with the Holy Spirit, if we prayed up, God is going to provide us safety on the road. So why do we need a silent partner, or why are they important?
Sure. So practically speaking, there's a few reasons. One, if you open your door, let's just say it's a young lady that's opening their door, 20-something years old, and gets a guy that shows up who's 40 and another 45-year-old man there, it could already be intimidating just to have 2 people showing up to your door. Even if it's not 2 men, 2 people, period. And when both of them speaking to you, it almost comes off as an attack, somewhat, in the sense that it's coming from multiple angles. And so what we want to do is we want to be able to keep that conversation between the one person to the other. And it helps out in multiple settings. One, more practical one as well, is for accountability. When you have somebody going through, you are going to be able to have somebody that substantiates what's being said. And then on top of that, you also have the accountability of doctrine. And so what's going out there and we're teaching, we are showing, obviously God sees everything that we say, but what we're teaching we need to be accurate. And also having another person with you is very helpful to keep that accountable. A third part is also for instruction. Many people are just barely starting out on soul winning, and it can be scary to go randomly. And the big thing is, this is something unlike most of what we've ever done. At most, maybe you've been paid to do door-to-door hangers for a company, or maybe door-to-door sales. But this one, we are telling people about Christ, and we're telling people about eternity. And just talked to a lady yesterday who was saying that she doesn't want to get it wrong. And I've met preachers before that they don't even want to go soul winning because they don't want to get it wrong. And it's really sad to me that we live just in the way that we're so fearful of that. Whereas the silent partner really helps you get into that groove of understanding how it is to be done, and certain things to say and certain things not to say.
And sometimes I used to go by myself, and then I feel like discouraged. If someone is with me, I can keep going. I can knock more and more doors. I can get a lot of grounds covered.
Right.
So that's good.
Right. Well, and that's very true. And that brings us to the more important point, and that's the spiritual side of it. When you have a person going out there, it's wonderful when one person's going out. And there's been many times where I've gone door to door by myself, as you have. And it's different. It's different.
Right.
You knocked on sometimes even more doors. There's little delays.
Yeah.
But the truth is, what you find is that there's less responsiveness. And what I found is if I bring one more person, it just seems that it's multiplied the number of people that get saved. And it's not because all of a sudden I'm on my best game because somebody's with me.
Yeah.
But literally people are willing to listen. And there's a understanding that God is helping. And really the biggest part is that it's important because the silent partner is not just there to tag along, but is actually silently laboring as well.
Yeah.
And what they're doing laboring is specifically prayer. And it's not the type of prayer where they kneel down right there and start praying with their hands to the air or bow down on the ground, but literally they're praying silently to God. So the person who's speaking has a chance to talk uninterrupted. The silent partner has a chance to pray. And really the labor of prayer is not just also important, but it's literally, I would say, vital and its importance, because obviously soul winning is a spiritual work. And then one last thing is the silent partner helps with distractions.
Yeah, that's good.
And that's a really, really big one. Distractions come from anywhere, and they always do. It's interesting. You can watch, if you've been soul winning, you can think back on where distractions come from. Distractions don't normally come at the beginning. Distractions are going to come halfway through this.
Almost there. Almost
right.
down the gospel.
You tell them that they're lost and they deserve hell, and that Jesus died for them, rose again. And then you bring them to the point where, hey, they need to make a decision, and all of a sudden the kid gets really upset. The dog starts barking, and neighborhood kids show up, or somebody. If somebody's going to pull up into the driveway, it's always at that moment. And so the silent partner is able to help out with that. Oftentimes they can deflect really quickly, go talk to that individual, play with the kids, pet the dog.
I actually remember there's one time when I'm talking to a person about the gospel, and then his neighbor tried to came to his door, and then my silent partner just went to talk to him and just distract him. So that's perfect.
Well, and we had it actually right outside here on the church property where two men had come out, and we were praying, and they came to interrupt our prayer. But anyways, one of them really wanted to teach us about Muslim teachings, specifically Nation of Islam teachings, and telling us everything was wrong. But the other guy was willing to listen to what we were saying. And so what we were able to do is to divide and conquer. So while a man named Josh was speaking with this other man, and he was able to tell him the truth and encourage him about that, I was able to take the other guy and just distract him. And so that way he couldn't keep teaching these perverse doctrines. And so the other guy, now he ended up that the other guy was a Christian, and he had gotten saved previously, but he was away from the Lord. And so he was able to, right there, he ended up bowing on the front lawn of the church with a man named Josh, and he got his heart right with God right there. And it wouldn't have been possible had the other man had the opportunity to speak the whole time.
Yeah, and I also think one more crucial aspect of being a silent partner is to learn, because silent partner, sometimes they don't know how to preach the gospel. That's why they are the silent partner. So we want them to learn to preach the gospel as soon as possible, so they can be a talker. And then think about if you have 3 talkers in one group, that's a huge waste of manpower.
Right.
Like last Sunday, we had exactly 4 talkers and 4 silent partners. That's amazing. We have more grounds covered, right? And once they become talkers, they can ask their friends to be their silent partner. So we can multiply soul winners. We can have more people saved, more people talk to, things like that.
A big thing is that there's biblical precedent for why. We have Moses is instructed of God to go and talk to Pharaoh. He says he can't. Why? Because he's incapable of speaking. And obviously he's been raised up. Even the New Testament talks about his speech. He's a good speaker. But he feels that he's incapable. So what does God do? God sends him somebody that will speak for him, Aaron. And so anyways, Moses is still doing the work. And then, of course, Aaron is the one who is designed by God to speak in this. And obviously Moses does speak throughout his ministry. He's not like Aaron does for the rest of his life, because we talk about the direction Moses sets decisions and things that he says later on. Different times he'll speak to the nation. But for that time period, God had Aaron speak for him, specifically to Pharaoh. And so obviously that's a good example. The other thing, in the New Testament, you have Barnabas. Barnabas, the son of consolation. Now they had heard about the Christians and what was going on up in Antioch, and so when he was on his way there, he stopped and picked up Paul. Now Paul, newer Christian, had been discipled, had been growing, but while we think of Paul, the great apostle and the preacher and the church planter, ultimately he didn't start out that way. After a time of training, he actually went and was with Barnabas, but Barnabas was the lead guy. And in fact, he was the spokesman, if you could call it that, for a time period, as Paul increased in that direction. Eventually, and based on what we find in biblical accounts, it's probably around 13 years before Paul really was the leader in his own group. And then he would bring along other people and mention several of them. For instance, Epaphras. It talked about how he labored, but the way he labored really was in prayer. And so he labored specifically, and so that was the person that helped Paul, but it was in prayer.
And also I'm thinking about the job for the silent partners is also to observe, because personally, if I preach the gospel to a group of people, it's say three kids at the same time, and they both believe and prayed, I will only count one salvation personally. But there's one time I remember I got 3 people believe and pray. I was about to only count 1 salvation, but my silent partner was telling me they all paid attention, so I count 3 salvations. So because when I'm preaching the gospel, I only focus on one person when talking to a group. So my silent partner can really tell who paid attention.
Yeah, and a lot of times they'll see that. I remember going and we were sharing the gospel with some people, and we had a chance to actually sit down at the table. And I was watching this man share the gospel, and there was 5 teenage kids, maybe 4 teenage, whatever it was, 4 or 5 teenagers, girls and guys. And what was interesting is that they were with him; they were paying attention, seemingly. And so he led them to go and pray. And so he tells them, we're going to go and pray, and they said, yes, we'll do that. But as they're praying, he's starting to go into this prayer and saying, repeat after me. And I am standing to the side here, and they are looking at each other. And they are mocking him while he's praying.
Wow.
And so at the end of it, he's really excited, like, oh, these teenagers get saved. But they didn't. They were mocking him. They were just being respectful to his face. But when not, they didn't care. And that's something I've seen multiple times where, a silent partner is able to help diffuse that. And not to give them a false assurance, like, oh, well, don't worry about it. You're going to heaven. Even though there was no concern for it.
Okay, so what not to do as a silent partner?
So the big one is if you're a silent partner, it's important to stay silent.
Yeah.
Now, occasionally, perhaps the Lord will put something. I've had a number of times where I was a silent partner, and I am still the silent partner. A lot of times, even if I go with you, we'll take turns, and I'm the silent partner. And just because I'm one of the speakers and Justin is a speaker, if me and Justin are going together, it doesn't mean that we both talk every time. If it's my turn to stay silent, I stay silent. But sometimes the Lord will put something in your heart, very specific. You can plug in. The other times it would be if you're with an inexperienced soul winner, one that perhaps questions come up and they don't know, then you can go ahead and jump in. But that's typically more rare than not. The important thing is to stay silent. That's the big number one.
Well, the rule of thumb is the silent partner should stay silent unless they are asked to respond to a certain question they didn't know about. And then the best thing is, you speak Spanish and I speak Chinese and English, so when we're knocking on the door and then that person is speaking Spanish, we can just be a tag team, so that's perfect.
Right, exactly. And so we can just cover a lot of grounds there. And so that is very very helpful. But another do not do is don't cause distractions. One thing I've actually seen a number of silent partners do is that because they're silent, if they tend to get the idea, well, they're not really doing anything. They're just a warm body. And that's not true. You're laboring in prayer. And so both those count very, very much. But what they'll do is they'll get distracted by things. And so they'll start playing, they'll start fidgeting, especially younger guys, or younger ladies, I guess. They'll start fidgeting with the little items that will be around the property, or they'll ask questions about things, or they'll ask a question, and this is the awkward one, they'll ask a question at the worst times. Like they'll ask about a sports team. They'll see a sports flag, and you're sharing the gospel with them, and they'll just suddenly interject a question. They're like, "Oh, so what do you think about the game tomorrow?" Wrong time, wrong time. And so we want to make sure that we're not only just staying silent, but not adding distractions. And then the other one is not diffusing distractions. And so a kid comes along and wants to talk or wants to play, and you just don't do anything. Or the dog comes along and is distracting, you don't do anything. The individual, that's actually damaging, because what ends up being is that the silent partner is just is an ornament. And what you want to be is helpful. And so you are helping that individual. And even if you don't know how to speak very confidently or speak very well, you can typically come up with a couple blanket questions that can help out with the individual, like who they are, introducing yourself and what you're doing, sharing information about the church and about Jesus. You can tell them these things, and a lot of times it's just enough to give them a little bit of time. Even if it's to help people with groceries, they'll show up during that. We just offer to help them out. It'll help out. Obviously, it's ministering to them, but it's also giving a little bit of time for the soul winner to share the gospel.
All right, so Pastor, can you tell us the reward of a silent partner, even though they're not sharing the gospel? But
sure, and that's a big one. I remember the very first person I led to the Lord, and I didn't know what to do. As far as I'd only been out a couple times and just recently saved. It was interesting that that I kind of had to literally chase this person down. And it was exciting when I got to lead somebody to the Lord. And so that was really, really big for me. But the other thing is it gives you a passion to want to do more. You lead somebody to the Lord, and literally what you see it is that somebody that was going to hell is no longer going to hell. How do you top that? I mean, it doesn't matter how good your sports team, it doesn't matter if it's the very worst sports team in the whole world, and they come back and win the national championship, it doesn't matter. But what does matter is that when you do labor as a silent partner, you're a part of that as well. Sure, you didn't say those words, but you were a part of that as well. And obviously there's biblical precedent, as we had been discussing a little earlier, that in the Old Testament you have David that is pursuing the bad guys, and they are instructed, part of them that couldn't go further, to stay by the stuff. And the Bible says that their reward will be...
They shall part alike.
They shall part alike. And so the reward is the same way, even though they were not going to the full endeavor of the work, they were still serving.
So to you who are out there who don't know how to go door knocking, the best way to learn soul winning is not reading the book. The best way is actually to go be a silent partner, to learn from the talker, right?
I agree. To me, the best parts of education, there was, when I went to college, for instance, I gained a lot of mental knowledge. And one of the things I was discouraged about was when I went to ministry, all that mental knowledge didn't translate. I knew a lot of stuff. But when I was receiving, I've taken times where I've tried to get some education on certain subject matters, and when I'm doing it, it makes the world of difference. And honestly, there's nothing like hands-on experience. And this is not an academic course. This is a spiritual work, and you cannot practice spiritual. Spiritual is only spiritual. There's no other way around it. And so the best way to be involved in it is by laboring in prayer, being involved in a prayer-bathed work. And so when you go soul winning, you've been spending this spiritual time with God, and then doing the work in response to what God has wanted you to do. And as you're trusting in Him, then He's going to continue to give you what you need to be able to accomplish that work. But you can't practice at it because it's a spiritual work.
Well, it's great talking to you, Pastor, and hopefully we can do some more videos in the future.
All right. Thanks, sir.
Yep.